Okay, so the reason I thought this would be a good idea is because I'm comparing three different polyphonic synthesizers that I own. And I put out a video quite recently which was just to compare a simple monophonic patch on each of those synthesizers. And I'm dealing with polyphonic synthesizers, so I thought, okay, well the next good thing to do would be to do a polyphonic patch. So I thought, okay, well let's pick a well-known patch, one that we all know, a simple one, and let's see where we go from there. So that was the idea behind this little exercise. It's not just about the sound, and it's not just about how close to the sound I can get with the synthesizers. It's about the whole process for me, about going through the same process on each synthesizer, seeing how I feel about it, seeing how it works for me or doesn't work for me. That's the idea behind this whole exercise. Those three synthesizers are the Behringer DeepMind, the Novation Peak, and the Roland JD-XA. They're three quite different synthesizers, and I will get onto that in a future video, but for the time being this is patch recreation of In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins, to see if I can recreate that pad sound. Okay, so here we are with the Roland JD-XA. It's quite a different and interesting synthesizer. It's got a lot of quirks to it, but it's capable of creating some really quite wonderful sounds. It's got an analog side and a digital side. Now, in terms of polyphony, the analog side is 4-voice polyphonic, whereas the digital side is 64-voice polyphonic. Now, if I want to recreate this patch for In the Air Tonight and I want to play it, then I've got a problem if I want to use the analog side of things. The way Phil Collins is playing the pads, he's actually using 5 notes. He's holding down 2 notes constantly for a bass line, and then he's playing 3-note chords over the top, which is 5 notes in total. We've only got 4 notes of analog polyphony to play with here. So for simplicity point of view, I'm not going to recreate the patch using analog oscillators and filter. I'm just going to use the digital side of things. If I wanted to use analog, I'd have to record the bass notes separately to the chords. It would just be a little bit more complicated. And to be honest with you, the analog and the digital oscillators, in terms of simple waveforms, they sound really quite similar to each other. They're really quite good. And in terms of the digital filter, it sounds really good as well, until you push it very, very hard. And we don't need to push it very hard for this particular patch. So for simplicity's sake, I'm going to just use digital side of things and nothing else. Now you'll notice that there are a couple of green lights flashing, and those are indicating that there is MIDI data being received to these 2 digital parts here. Basically, I've set them to be on the same channel, MIDI channel, and they're receiving the MIDI data from Cubase that's running in the background. Cubase is playing the drum track, it's looping around on that, and it's also playing the chord and bass note data. So both of these parts are receiving that MIDI data. I've made sure that the other digital parts and the analog parts are listening to a separate MIDI channel, so they're not going to get triggered by the sequencer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up one digital part to be the square wave, the second digital part to be the sawtooth. I'm then going to detune them very slightly, apply a filter, apply some effects, and let's see where we go with that. So let's start with the first part. Each part has got 3 partials on the digital side, and a partial basically is a voice. So a voice is a choice of oscillator, waveform, or a PCM sample, or whatever it happens to be, and then all the settings that you can apply to it. So we're just going to use one partial for each part, and this partial here is selected at the moment. If I just enable it, switch it on, and then turn up the volume, you'll hear it start to play. Okay. So at the moment it's playing a regular square wave. There's also a pulse width modulatable square wave waveform that we can choose. that one. And I can then set the pulse width. I'm going to leave it sort of around 40%, 50% for the time being. Then I'm going to switch to the second digital part. And enable it. And I'm going to choose sawtooth. Now it's turned down at the moment. Let me just turn it up. Now I'd already set it to be 1 octave up because I've been playing around with this earlier. So this pitch control here very handily goes up in semitones. All the way up to 2 octaves up and down. So I'll set it to be 1 up. Then in terms of fine tuning, this control here, just a little bit of detune. Now I want to start treating the 2 digital parts together. I want to select them both. And then change the filter the same amount for both of them. Tremolo effect, which I'm also going to turn on and not make it too drastic. That's the original playing now. And now the JD-XA. It's missing some of the bottom end on the chords, so I'm going to just change the keyboard tracking. Pretty close. So the JD-XA has got a lot more effects on board than the Innovation Peak does. It's got quite a lot of effects, quite a lot of there's quite esoteric and interesting effects here as well. And there isn't very much menu diving going on. It's a bit of a crappy display. But in terms of tweaking, there's so much here in terms of physical controls. So it's really nice from that point of view. I think that Roland did a good job. It's when you get on to the more sort of the PCM sample sounds that this synth has inside it. When you get into sort of that, and I think that's where the power of the digital side really is. You know, you've got like choir sounds and orchestra sounds and stuff like that, which it's really nice to then blend with synthesizer type sounds. But when you start to get into those samples, that's when you realize how limiting having a little a little display like this is, with just sort of like left and right, up and down buttons. There's no sort of like data selector control. There's no quick and easy way of jumping to orchestra sounds or vocal sounds, or whatever it happens to be that you want. It becomes incredibly frustrating when you're trying to sift through. I think it's over 400 different waveforms and sort of sample sounds that are available to you on the digital side. When you're trying to sort of like scroll through that many, it's very, very frustrating. And this is where the JD-XA is kind of crossing over to a kind of more traditional workstation keyboard. And I like the fact that there's so much sort of power there available to you with these samples. They sound really fantastic. But you have this sort of synthesizer-y kind of interface to deal with, and no easy way to sort of like access it. So I think that's the main sort of way that the JD-XA sort of like doesn't do it for me. There's a lot of power and potential there, but it's difficult to get at it. And there's a lot of power and potential with these parts and partials. And again, you know, when you want to drive it from a MIDI sequencer, you're having to dive into menus to actually set up MIDI channels, and it's quite frustrating to get something set up the way you want it to. Once it's set up, and then you know you're just changing sliders and fiddling around with knobs and stuff like that, it's great. But it's that initial sort of setup and sound selection that's really quite a pain in the ass with the synthesizer.